Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Geeta Menon, the current president of SCP. We lost two important members from our field within a year. These scholars made not just important knowledge contributions to the field, but also invested in future scholars through mentorship and doctoral education. Jerome Williams passed away on January 29th last year, and Tom Meyvis on January 27th this year. The SCP community is deeply impacted by these losses. The SCP board, SCP co-chairs, and I decided to use the presidential session this year as career tributes to these scholars. In the area of knowledge creation that we're in, one's legacy is not only through creating knowledge, but also influencing and mentoring future scholars who will continue to push the frontiers. J.T. Thomson, for example, won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1906, but it is his role as an educator that is considered even more important. 7 of his students and research assistants went on to win Nobel Prizes as well. In addition, his son won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1937. When we think about Jerome and Tom, we see their unique, impactful scholarly contributions, but also how they've influenced the research, thinking, and lives of so many other scholars. Today, we dedicate this session to them. I did not know Jerome Williams personally, but I was certainly aware of some of his contributions. His academic career spanned 4 decades. While he published many articles and books, he was also very dedicated to issues of diversity and inclusion. In fact, there are many scholars who think of Jerome as their unofficial mentor. He contributed a lot to the field and specifically to SCP. He was the chair of the Committee on Ethnic Minority Affairs and member of the Executive Committee from 1995 to 2001. Most recently, he served as provost at Rutgers University. I did know Tom Meyvis personally. He was a longtime colleague and dear friend of mine. He joined NYU Stern in 2001, and on his arrival, I was appointed his mentor, a role I pretended to take very seriously, even though Tom needed little mentoring. Tom published impactful articles in our top journals, serving as an award-winning reviewer, ERB member, and an associate editor over the years, and he was a wonderful mentor and advisor to 24 doctoral students. He co-chaired the SCP conference in 2013. This session has 2 parts, acknowledging the research, service, and mentorship contributions of each scholar. The first part is moderated by Vanessa Perry, Jerome's mentee and friend, and the second part by Chris Januszewski, who was Tom Meyvis's doctoral advisor and friend. Please note that the chat function is on and is public, so that if anyone from the audience wants to contribute a remark or a memory, you can do so. This session is also being recorded so that others who were unable to attend today can watch later. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Geeta. It is really an honor to have the opportunity to share my reflections about Jerome Williams, who was a friend, colleague, supporter, mentor, motivator, voice of reason, very much like a family member since 1997. I would also like to take a moment and just ask that we all send positive vibes to my good friend David Wooten and his family, who are, as we speak, at David's father's funeral services. This was his session, and I'm sure we are all grateful to him for making it happen. My first real memory of Jerome was at the Marketing and Public Policy Conference in 1998. It was my first conference in marketing, and I was presenting a paper with Paul Bloom. Jerome actually attended my presentation and afterwards introduced himself, and I'm not sure he ever missed another one of my presentations at a conference ever again. But through Paul, I was familiar with Jerome's work as someone who was an expert on racial issues in marketing, and frankly, that may have been the only time the topic of race was mentioned during my entire doctoral program experience. So I attribute a great deal of my growth and my opportunities to profound influence over the years of Jerome. I was deeply honored to receive the Williams Qualls Spratlin Award, the AMA Award for Multicultural Mentorship in 2020. And I am even more humbled and grateful for that now. So speaking of former Williams-Qualls Spratling awardees, without further ado, I will introduce our panelists. First, my very good friend and brother from another mother, David Crockett, who is Jerome's co-author, protege, mentee, and the one to whom Jerome has passed his baton as leader of social justice scholarship and marketing, professor of the Department of Marketing at the University of Illinois, Chicago, David Crockett. Then we'll hear from Ashwani Banga, who was Jerome's friend and Rutgers colleague, and is currently the provost and executive vice chancellor of Rutgers University, Newark. Last but not least, we will hear from Uwe Myers-Ferguson, Jerome's former UT Austin doctoral student, who is now Assistant Dean of Impact and Engagement and Associate Professor of Marketing at the Howard University School of Business. So, David?
Thank you so much, Vanessa, and to Geeta and Chris for putting this together, and also to my good friend, David, and my deepest condolences to him and his family. It's a pleasure to be able to say a few words on behalf of my friend and colleague and mentor and role model, Jerome Williams. And many of you who are on this webinar and on this panel can claim all of the same kinds of connections. And that is what makes this session such a beautiful thing. Now, our 5-minute time limit, fortunately for me, frees me of any obligation to try to be profound. My hope is that I can say something vaguely insightful about his career as a scholar, because it's been deeply impactful on me. As scholars, we work in a gift economy, and anthropologists talk about that being a set of connections and relationships between people defined by its mutuality and reciprocity in terms of how they engage each other. In terms of scholarship, for the vast majority of us, the best outcome that we can hope for from our scholarship is that our ideas go on to spur even better ideas from some enterprising doctoral student, some enterprising faculty somewhere who engages with what we've talked about, wrestles with it, points out its flaws, and hopefully comes up with something better. Jerome, as a worker in a gift economy, was especially productive. Now, I'll just say a couple things about citations, and I'll ground a little bit of this in citations with the recognition that this is but one measure of scholarly impact, and it's a particularly conservative measure of scholarly impact, but it does help paint a picture, which is what I think we can do here very briefly, or at least paint one part of a picture of his impact on people's thinking. So at least a quick perusal of Google Scholar says that Professor Williams has over 4,700 total citations to date. More of interest to me in the time that I have is a quick perusal of the 12 articles that he has with over 100, that have at least 100 citations, right? There are not many scholars, first of all, who can lay claim to that. But what I wanted to do was just a quick run through, not of the articles themselves, but to zoom out a little bit and talk about kind of where we see those articles. Jerome hasn't just given a lot, he's given uncommonly broadly. So as I looked across those articles, which again, by this measure suggests his deepest impact, I saw 5 themes that came up across them. So one thematic position for Jerome's scholarship is on questions of consumer privacy, particularly in online spaces. A second one is cross-cultural research and marketing. So in consumer privacy, there are over 700 citations. In cross-cultural marketing research, there are close to 400, so more than 350 citations. Another area is his work on public public health and health disparity. That's another one, very close to 400 citations. The area that I most know him for is on ethnicity, race, and racial inequality, including his work with the late Jerry Henderson on consumer racial profiling. Well over 600 citations in this area. And more recently, he's been working with scholarship in transformative services research, over 1,000 citations in that area. And the point that I want to hopefully leave you with is that Jerome's career is quietly breathtaking in many ways, and really not just through the totality of citations, but also through the network of relationships between scholars themselves and areas of inquiry that don't often talk to one another, right? He has traveled a path in areas of our discipline that many people don't travel simultaneously. And so that is one of the things that I think is probably not something that we initially think of when we think of Jerome, but perhaps we should. And with that, I'll turn it to Ashwan.
Well, thank you, Dave, and hello, everyone. So some of you may be thinking that my brightly colored shirt is not appropriate for this occasion, and Jerome would agree, because this shirt is not bright enough for his taste. I would tell him that he would make a very bad spy, because with those shirts, he could never travel incognito. So Jerome was surely a man of style, but above all, a man who was devoted to serving all whom he touched. First and foremost, he was devoted to his family, his wife Lillian and 5 children, Deneen, Derek, Daniel, Dante, and Deja. Most of my conversations with Jerome were about family, both his and mine. He would often ask about my daughter, make a note of the silly things I bragged about, and then follow up on those silly things the next time we met. He cared so much about my family, I can only imagine how much he cared for his own. His love for everyone came from his faith, which he served very well. He was a congregation elder for Jehovah's Witness for 3 decades and himself officiated 40 weddings. In fact, I was at a staff lunch just yesterday and I met this young man who told me about the huge role that Jerome had played in his life, including officiating at his wedding. And over the past few months, I've met so many who told me about the times Jerome supported them without ever making a big deal about it. That's who Jerome was, a great man who would never boast about how great he was. Several years ago, he mentioned to me in passing that he would run a few miles every day. I thought he was showing off. What I came to know much later was that he had run 39 marathons. And as a student at the University of Pennsylvania, he captained both the track and cross-country teams and had broken several records. In fact, he had been part of the Olympics trials, missing the final team by only a whisker. And he was a leader in academia too. The year he completed his PhD, he was the only African-American to graduate with a PhD in marketing. And then he served all those who came after him. He teamed up with other luminaries on the PhD project to change the face of business school faculty. And for his efforts, he was inducted into the PhD Project Hall of Fame. I've been to some of those events and seen faculty and students treat him with so much reverence, you would think he's a saint. And at other times, you would think he's a rock star with admirers crowding to shake hands with him. Jerome served our society in other ways too. His landmark contributions are in the areas of race and market discrimination. The American Marketing Association named him a fellow and also honored him with a Lifetime Achievement Award. In fact, they also have an annual award that's named after him and 2 other luminaries. His work has been cited in congressional testimonies. He engaged the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to change lending practices. He partnered on First Lady Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, and he also spoke directly to the public through the media. Just last year, there were dozens of pieces that talked about his research, including a New York Times article on Black-owned businesses having a hard time getting federal aid during COVID. His deep insights came from his passion, and that passion came from his own lived experience, having faced numerous challenges through his own life. He would sometimes narrate those stories with loads of humor thrown in, but there was no one more serious than Jerome in tackling the critical issues of our time. And finally, Jerome served Rutgers in so many ways, through his teaching, research, producing star doctoral students, and finally, serving Rutgers as provost. He's no longer with us, but the man, the legend, will live on, and so will his accomplishments, his acts of kindness, and his love for all. He will continue to have an impact through his writings and through all of us whom he touched professionally, which will keep, and all of us will keep pushing to advance Jerome's mission to make things better for all. I will miss Jerome a lot and the sound of his big laughter, but his shining light will always guide me and countless others. Thank you very much. And Yube, you're next.
Thank you so much, Aswani. Hello, my name is Yube Myers-Ferguson, and I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Jerome Williams, as an undergraduate at Howard University. So one of the most important lessons that I learned from him was the power of exposure. And it's taken me 20 years post my first introduction to his method of mentorship, mentoring hundreds of students on my own, and then also even becoming a parent to really understand the power of how his ability to share knowledge with scholars really changes lives. He will be missed because of all that he did to change the lives of people around him. So if you ask my 4-year-old what she wants to be when she grows up, she'll probably tell you a teacher, a doctor, and a princess. And that's because those are the leaders in the spaces that she's been introduced to at this age. So those places being school, health checkups, and Disney movies, right? The point of me saying this is that unless you have a line of sight to an industry or to a career path, you just don't even understand it. And he was so insightful of thinking about how academia could be shared with students, and specifically minority students, while he was at Howard University. He was introducing a career path that many of us did not understand or even contemplate because it felt so abstract. And so he introduced me and my class and every class that he taught to the PhD project, its mission, and really opened up the discussion about higher education as a career opportunity. And that seed was planted. I heard him, it was planted. I had conversations with my classmates, years afterward, after we had had his class, and it had stuck in my mind and has stuck in a couple of my colleagues' minds as well. And so when I really started thinking about what my next steps were personally, I did a master's program after I finished my undergraduate work, and I worked in advertising, and I just really, I felt like there was still more for me to do. I liked research, and so I reached back out to him. And again, his ability to be so accessible to his students, hundreds of students, I'm sure by time I came along and even after, and he just was always an open door. And so he was open to a conversation and even mentored me through the process of trying to figure out where I wanted to go to grad school myself. And I followed him to UT, University of Texas at Austin, because I knew there was something special about his ability to mentor. And by mentor, I meant expose and share and just be a wide open resource. And so that's my journey and how I ended up becoming one of his students, again, as a doctoral student, and he was my dissertation chair. But his impact is long lasting, because not only did he help me to be able to grow in my career trajectory, he's impacted how I engage the students that I am now touching. So it's exponential. And that's the power of exposure that he taught me. And again, I'm sure that everybody who interacted with him knows just how powerful and how impactful he is as a friend. But as a mentor, his legacy is gonna last on. So I'm excited again, sad to be doing a tribute to him, but glad to be able to tell a story and an important lesson that I learned from him. So I'll turn it back to you, Vanessa. Thank you.
Thank you, Yube. Thank you so much, Aswani. Thank you, David, for your remarks. for participating in this tribute and for your insights into who he was as a scholar, as a contributor to the academic community, and as a mentor. Jerome, if he were here, would be profoundly uncomfortable. He did not like being the center of attention, but I think he would be moved to know that his work continues. And so my hope is that we're able to do his legacy justice and continue his great work. So with that, I will turn it over to Chris Januszewski.
Hi, my name is Chris Januszewski. I was Tom Meyvis's dissertation advisor and his friend. Today, we want to tell you about Tom, and we have an agenda. We are hoping that our stories will illustrate best practices that will benefit your career. So Tom was a master educator, and I want to explain what a master educator is and why master educators are important to our field. Most importantly, I want you to be aware of the characteristics of a master educator so that you can actively work to become one. First, think about how you were trained. You learn to identify and develop an idea using the advice of colleagues. You learn how to develop strong method skills by consulting experts in your department or by reading exemplary research articles. Academic writing, reviewing, editing, mentoring, those are all skills that you have learned from others. Even your approach to teaching was probably adopted from senior colleagues. In other words, whether you're a PhD student or an assistant professor, your life has been a constant search for experts who could help you develop skills. Yet I would argue that not any expert was acceptable. That in fact, when you think about your lives in your trainings, you are, and in the fact that you're surrounded by a lot of experts, you tend to gravitate to certain types of people. In fact, if you were to look at your colleagues, most of them would tend to gravitate to a few experts in your department. I call these people that we gravitate to master educators. There's something special about them that kind of draws people in and gets them into their door. What makes a person a master educator? I'm going to list 3 general qualities and then leave the specifics to Steph, Jeff, Vicky, and Hyung. First, I would argue that a master educator provides knowledge with a nuance. Now, everyone in this meeting is knowledgeable, and everyone in this meeting will become more knowledgeable during their career. But what separates a master educator from his or her peers is the ability to apply the right knowledge to the right situation. Their insights are incredibly diagnostic. Put another way, when you walk away from an interaction with a master educator, you probably think to yourself, wow, that was really interesting and insightful and helpful. And whether that's an office conversation or a reaction to a review or a letter from an associate editor, that feeling that something was super helpful means that you've interacted with a master educator. Second, master educators are good at providing painless learning. A master educator not only delivers, and this is especially at the PhD level, a master educator not only delivers diagnostic advice, but the person does so in a way that makes the student feel good about themselves. It's the difference between leaving a meeting saying, boy, I feel energized, versus, man, do I feel deflated. Finally, a master educator has an ability to teach mentoring skills. So when you're being mentored by a master educator, it's not just the case that you're getting advice, but in some ways you understand how you're being mentored so that when you have to mentor in the future, you can borrow from the way they've mentored you. So in my mind, or when I think about Tom, Tom was excellent at delivering knowledge with a nuance. He is great at facilitating painless learning, and he mentored in a way that was both helpful and instructive. Today, we're celebrating Tom's life as an academic, but our really hope is that our stories will motivate other people to become master educators, because that's what really mattered to Tom. So now I'm going to turn over the floor to Steph, and she's going to focus on Tom's role as a collaborator.
Hi, I'm Steph Tully. Tom was my advisor, co-author, and friend, and I've been asked to speak about Tom's approach to research. I feel very fortunate to do so. Tom's approach to research made me inspired in my own work and made me believe that if there were enough people with the same values as Tom out there, that our field would continue to improve. I've tried to summarize some of the most important lessons that I learned from Tom into 3 simple but important guiding principles that I think he'd want you all to know. First, Tom believed in doing fewer projects, but doing them well. Given how much time and effort is spent working on a project and getting it through the review process, when I'd come to Tom's office with a half-baked idea, Tom would ask me if this was really something I wanted to spend the next 5 years of my life doing. And if not, he suggested that I spend that time that I would have been spending on that mediocre project, thinking up bigger and better ideas. I honestly believe that one of the best things that Tom ever did for me was to tell me which ideas weren't worth pursuing. Second, and related to the first point, Tom believed in thinking deeply about the problems we study and how to study them. Tom believed it was important to think about why we're doing what we're doing. He advocated for doing what was accurate rather than what was convention. On my first project with Tom, I was trying to build on the existing body of research, and I created a study using stimuli as similar to the original work as possible. Tom looked at it and recognized a potential confound. When I told him that's what previous research did, he told me that's not a good reason to keep doing it. And while I was initially frustrated in having to come up with a new study design, he was totally right. And in fact, by pushing me to find a way around the confound, Tom and I came up with a much more interesting research idea than I'd even set out to test in the first place. Finally, Tom believed in giving constructive criticism without demeaning others in the process. Tom struck a really unique balance. He was both extremely opinionated and somehow also extremely easy to get along with. He had strong opinions on research and wouldn't hesitate to make those opinions known. In fact, sometimes his edits to my study designs and manuscripts were so detailed that it felt like there was more red on the page than black. However, he always kept the focus on the research rather than the researcher, and his criticisms were always constructive and in the service of improving science, and they were often delivered with a little bit of humor. I'm so grateful to have had such an aspirational mentor and co-author, and I share these lessons with you today in hopes that they inspire you as much as they've inspired me. Thank you so much. And now here's a message from Jeff Gallick, who was not able to be here today.
Hi, everyone. I'm very sorry I couldn't be there today, but I am honored to be asked to say a few words about my dear friend and colleague, Tom Meyvis. I first met Tom when I was a PhD student at NYU, and we immediately hit it off. We shared similar interests such as road biking, and just had a wonderful relationship, despite the fact that I was a student and he was a faculty member. Now, I've been asked to speak about Tom as a collaborator, and so I'll focus my comments on that. In short, Tom was easily one of the best people I've ever worked with in academia. He was thoughtful, generous with his time, and always had a positive attitude that just made the work worth doing. And it's that last part that I want to focus on today. As you all know, at times research can be a real slog. Things don't go as planned, studies fail, and motivation to continue can easily fade. But not with Tom. Tom had the ability to make research fun. That ability to make research fun is truly one of the things that set Tom apart from others. And to illustrate that point, I want to share one of my favorite stories of working with Tom. Tom and I loved to road bike. We would go on long bike rides all around New York and had plenty of conversations while doing so. One conversation was about how we never quite seemed to accurately remember how difficult different rides were. We would redo them and our memories just didn't comport with our new experiences. And thus a research project was born. Now, typically we would start with a deep read of the literature, some pilot studies using hypothetical scenarios, and then move on to more substantive things. But not in this case. In this case, Tom had the crazy idea to run a kind of pseudo field study right out of the gate. And note that this was 15 years ago, well before field studies were as popular as they are today. But most critically, we ran a field study that was just downright fun. We created 3 massive signs that were held up as runners ran past us on a particularly difficult part of a running loop in Central Park known as the Harlem Hill. Runners would literally shout to us as our team of RAs frantically wrote down their responses on a clipboard. Now, the study ultimately didn't yield a whole lot of interesting insights. In fact, it was buried in the general discussion of a paper we co-wrote sometime later. But the study was fun. Now, to understand why this story is so emblematic of the experience of working with Tom, you have to realize that I was a second-year PhD student at the time the study was run. There may well have been much better uses of my time than standing on the side of a road in Central Park, hoping that runners would read our giant signs and respond. But the study was just downright fun, and Tom eagerly approved of it. He knew, as I now know today, that if research isn't enjoyable, it's not likely to get done at all. Tom knew that spending a day to collect these data, even if they bore little fruit, would make the entire project that much more enjoyable. It would excite me to work harder than if we just started this project in the plain vanilla way that most of us are used to. And he was completely right. He instilled in me the idea that our work needs not only to be true, important, and meaningful, but doing the work should be fun. For that, I am forever grateful to Tom and will carry his lessons with me personally and hopefully through my own doctoral students. To close, I want to say that, Tom, I miss you every day. Your friendship has meant the world to me, and my own work and the work of many others will never be as good as it was when working with you.
My name is Vicki Marwitz, and it's my complete honor to talk about Tom in service. Tom was not only my friend and co-author, but he was also my colleague for many years at NYU, where I had a bird's eye view of how he managed his career and how he balanced service with research and teaching. He was really a role model in how to be an excellent citizen at every stage of his career, but while also always having balance with his other professional and personal priorities. Let me start with Tom's service to the field. Tom provided incredibly valuable service through his extremely thorough and helpful reviews and AE reports. Some young scholars treat reviewing as a burden, something that gets in the way. But Tom knew from early on that scholarship could not move forward without high-quality volunteer reviewers. The broad range of journals and organizations that asked Tom to review for them highlights how highly respected his work was and how highly valued was his feedback. As the years went on, and editors saw Tom's high-quality reviews, he was asked to serve on many journal ERBs. One thing that's so impressive, but not at all surprising for those who have read Tom's reviews, is that he won JCR's Outstanding Reviewer Award 3 times. Since he was such an excellent reviewer, editors clamored to get him on their teams. Tom served as an AE for JCP, JCR for 2 different teams, and IJRM. For my JCR team, it was a very easy decision to ask Tom to serve as an AE for us, as he had broad knowledge of the literature, was well-versed in methodology, and was constructive in his approach. We were thrilled he said yes, and we called on him often. Tom also made major contributions to our field through serving on conference program committees, and to SCP more specifically by co-chairing the 2013 SCP conference in San Antonio. Who could forget his outfit for the closing Saturday Night Fever party? Tom knew that our conferences did not run themselves and generously gave his time to make them good experiences for all of us. Tom also served his school in many ways, but what was extraordinary was his service to doctoral education. Tom loved helping doctoral students, whether it be more broadly in the field by participating in doctoral colloquia and offering doctoral workshops, or closer to home by teaching and advising many cohorts of NYU doctoral students. I recommended to every doctoral student who asked to have Tom on their committee. Of my own NYU doctoral students who have defended, all but one had Tom on their committee. And that one was because he defended in Tom's first year at NYU. I gave Tom 1 year to get settled in, but after that, I realized I'd be doing my own students a disservice by not having them benefit from Tom's wisdom. Tom was so knowledgeable, supportive, and generous with his time and advice, and his funny manner put the students at ease in stressful times. Tom was advisor to 6 of his own students and was on the committees of 18 others. I was also on most of his students' committees, and so I saw firsthand how he worked with and mentored his students. Every student who worked with Tom felt incredibly fortunate to have him as a mentor. And I felt fortunate that my own students and all the NYU students and many others benefited from his mentoring. Tom served as coordinator of Stern's marketing doctoral program from 2014 to 2019. I was coordinator of that program about a decade earlier, and although Tom had only been at Stern for a few years then, I asked him to join the doctoral committee. He remained a highly valued doctoral committee member as other coordinators took over and put together their own committees and stayed on continuously until he took over himself as coordinator. Tom cared deeply about his department and his colleagues. He knew how incredibly important it was to hire good scholars and individuals who would support and contribute positively to the department's culture. He was always an active participant in faculty recruiting, both at AMA and on campus. He also chaired the faculty recruiting committee on a number of occasions. Once Tom was tenured, the school quickly identified him as someone who would do a thorough job on whatever he was asked to do, and he was asked to do a lot. He served on the Dean's Faculty Advisory Committee, the Senior Faculty Review Committee, a Dean's Search Committee, and many, many more. Tom and I served together on Stern's Faculty Council, where again, I had a chance to see up close how much he cared about his school and his colleagues. He had amazing values. He knew how to get things done, and always at the highest level. And he was fun to serve with because he brought his sharp sense of humor to all he did. Tom could diffuse any conflict or heated argument with a joke that somehow stopped whatever nonsense was going on and brought everyone back to the table to work. Overall, Tom was an excellent citizen to his department, school, and field. He'll be missed in so many ways, but serving with him and receiving his sage advice will be among the many ways Tom will be missed. And now I'll turn things over to Hyung.
My name is Hyung Yoon, and Tom was my advisor. So I'll be talking about Tom as an advisor and mentor on behalf of his recent student. When I was asked to discuss Tom's contribution to his student, I immediately realized expressing his impact in just a few minutes would be almost impossible. But I'll share a few things that came up to my mind. First, he laid a foundation for his students to grow as researchers. He guided us to set appropriate goals and really emphasize process, not just an outcome. I remember when we first talked about job market when I was a still first-year student. He told me that getting a so-called good job shouldn't be my goal. He said it would be more problematic if I got a good job, but didn't become a good researcher along the way. And over the past 7 years, through his advice and guidance, he really focused on training me to become a careful, meticulous researcher, just like Tom, who can think critically and clearly. He never said we should be submitting more papers or be working faster. Instead, he challenged me to take a close look at the phenomenon and tackle it in every possible way I could think of. Second, he showed his students how to enjoy the process of research. He knew when to take things seriously and when not to. With his sense of humor, Tom could also easily cheer me up after getting no result or receiving harsh review. The funny thing is, he would make sure that I correct my tiny mistake with his painstaking attention to detail, but when I feel terribly lost or overwhelmed, he never made me feel bad or question my ability. Instead, he would tell me with his unmistakable sense of humor that things happen and it's completely normal. And that's how I know his intention was always to teach me, never to judge me. Tom's sense of humor especially shined when our study failed. For example, in one project, we ran studies to change people's inaccurate intuition. And we failed to devise this error 13 times. But instead of being frustrated, we just laughed that we couldn't change people's intuition, even when we just hit them over the head. And then we would put ourselves in our participants' shoes and try to really understand what's actually going on. And ironically, this process was so much fun. So I know it may sound a little bit weird, but sometimes perfect results just felt so boring because that means I won't have a chance to have all the interesting discussion with Tom and learn from his thought process. Also, Tom had a talent for finding a positive side in almost everything: people, events, or half-baked idea I threw at him. I benefited so much from his talent. He would find something that could be potentially interesting from my nonsense, and that's how our random conversation could turn into meaningful discussion, all because of Tom. In addition to being a brilliant researcher, he was also one of the most generous, thoughtful, fun, and kind people I've ever met. As an advisor, he would think in advance about what students would need and was always eager to support us. Whenever I was going through a tough time, He would tell me that my happiness is more important than my productivity, and to make sure I took time to take care of myself. When COVID started and students had to stay another year, he worked very hard to make sure senior students could get funding. He continued to support his students even when he was fighting cancer. For example, while he was still in the hospital, 2 days after his first diagnosis, he emailed me saying he would try to be there for me during my job search, and I deserve it so much. To be honest, it was just so surprising to me because I felt he should not be worrying about anything else but his health. But that's just who Tom was. He really wanted to help students who needed him. Indeed, he continued to forward job posting, suggested meeting, and came to my practice talk. He also never forgot to congratulate me with my small achievement. When I finished my first job interview, he told me he's already so happy that I did my best, regardless of what the outcome will be. After learning from him for so many years, I have made a habit to put on my Tom hat whenever I design a study, interpret data, or make any important decision. I try to think about what Tom would do or what Tom would say. And this has helped me not to just think more clearly, but also to be more kind and genuine to people around me. I'm so thankful that I have all those memories and things he taught me. And I know he will always continue to guide me and his students through those memories, and that he will continue to impact the field through all of his many students.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm back. Okay, so here's the wrap up. I think when you listen to those comments, one thing you could do is you could try and think of the 10 different things that you're told and make a list. Maybe at the top of the list would be try experiments that are fun but are bound to fail, as Jeff and He Young told us. But I don't think that's the way we want you to leave the conversation. I think the important thing is that you kind of think at a very general level in terms of goals. What types of things do you need to do to be a master educator? And I think the first thing you might have heard across the stories is that you have to have a desire to be excellent. That every day in everything you do, beyond trying to publish your papers and get tenure or whatever happens, or get your next promotion or get your job, is you have to be excellent, and you have to find ways to be excellent and constantly work at it. The second thing you have to do is you have to be helpful. I think that finding ways to help people around you is a way in which our discipline improves. And so that if you're excellent and you're helpful, what's going to happen is that everyone around you will become better. And those people, whether it's the people within your department or the people within the discipline, having excellent, helpful people around makes us improve. And so I think that's the legacy we'd like you to walk away with respect to Tom. Try and be excellent, try and be helpful, and let's all get better. Okay, Geeta, we're back to you.
Those are wonderful tributes befitting of Jerome and Tom. We were discussing just before we started how neither Jerome nor Tom would like this attention focused on them, but we wanted to honor them and acknowledge the impact they've had on us individually and on the field. Thank you so much, panelists. I know it must be emotional for each of you. It certainly is for me. And to the audience, thank you all for coming and sharing in this session. It's deeply appreciated. We feel the respect and love. So thank you again. We're ending a little early, so you have about 15 minutes to the next session. Thank you again.